Did you know that your company has a DNA and that its genes define the shape, structure of your organization? And that determines the culture and what's possible to do, not do within an organization. If you find yourself in situations where you can't do something or you have to do it a particular way, you want to take a look at your company's DNA. Understanding the genes of your company will give you some insights into why your organization behaves the way that it does and why some things are not possible. This is a very advanced topic. Enterprise Agile coaches look at this very carefully to map out a successful Agile transformation. And because it has been ignored so much and so many transformations have failed, I wanted to give you at least a quick summary and a high level view, have an awareness that this exists. Because if you're engaging in a transformation, agile or AI, and you're unaware of this, you could be walking into some very turbulent waters. And in the case of AI, the consequences could be quite severe. So, brief understanding, little beginning, it's worth the time to understand this so that you have a good setup for a successful transformation. So let's dive in and take a look at what are these genes and what do they look like and what do we do once we understand them. The first organizational type that we want to take a look at is the hierarchy. In hierarchical organizations, as you would expect, we have centralized control. And there are a lot of impediments to innovation. Part of the reason is because there are unidirectional lines of communication. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not possible to get information from the lower levels of the organization to the higher levels. However, to do so requires tremendous amount of effort. It's like a salmon trying to swim upstream. It's possible, and it takes tremendous amount of energy. So when you come up with a good idea, an innovative idea, creative idea, in order to get that all the way up to the organization and down the organization for decision, you have to put tremendous amount of effort. It's not just having a good idea and passion and determination. It's having tenacity and patience to endure this process, which is highly bureaucratic and takes a tremendous amount of time. There are many layers in hierarchical organizations, and navigating through all of those takes time. This is the least compatible organizational structure type, and it's the least supportive of complex work, which means that they're not compatible with Agile and AI. Next is the flatter organization. In a flatter organization, as the name implies, we start removing layers of the organization. We still have a structure and it still has its rigidity elements. However, we soften them by introducing bidirectional lines of communication and by having fewer layers. Every layer that we reduce, we're reducing a layer of bureaucracy and delay. So they're more nimble, they're better able at pivoting, and they're better able at supporting change. Therefore, this is the entry level for beginning transformations, both agile and AI. You still have to make sure, be very careful of remaining very close alignment with management because the structure is still there. And just like hierarchies, it is inherently rigid and you have to work within its constraints. Beyond the flatter lies the flatarchies. Flatarchies are flatter organizations that occur that have implemented, they support innovation hubs, just the circles, kind of looking circles around the core of the organization. These innovation hubs are awarded a lot of autonomy, a lot of flexibility, because the main organization, the flat organization, has an interest. They have a puzzle. They have a capability that they really want. And they don't want the company's structure or any impediment to get in the way or delay getting the benefit from the discovery. So they create these innovation hubs to go out and do whatever it takes to figure it out. Once they do, once they have an answer, integrating that back to the rest of the organization can be difficult. There can be a lot of friction because whatever's been implemented maybe is incompatible with the company structure. The good news is that because they've succeeded at doing it, They know what needs to change. So they can provide not just the solution, but the blueprint or the roadmap of what needs to change in order to support it. You may need to spend some time making those changes before you can implement it, but at least you know what that roadmap looks like. Following that, we have the flat organizations. And if you notice, I use the same icon as the innovation hubs in the Flatter key. And the reason is because those innovation hubs could be flat organizations. They don't have to be, but they could be flat organizations. The characteristic of flat organizations, this is advanced stuff. This is very complex and requires a lot of maturity, organizational maturity to be able to support them, because the groups within the flat organization need to be self-managed. There is no hierarchy. There is no structure. There may not be groups. It's a whole group of people coming together, and that's it. So there's a lot of flexibility. Decision making is shared by everybody. Whomever is at the right moment, at the right time, with the right skills, is fully empowered to make the decisions. And as a result of that, they are operating right at the edge of chaos. Therefore, in moments of high crisis, or when you want to scale them, they run into a lot of impediments. As a result of that, we don't see very large flat organizations. These tend to be small organizations, and they require high levels of maturity in order to avoid falling into chaos. But they're very nimble and they're very productive. They can pivot very easily, and they're very good at implementing new creative ideas. So, very powerful. Beyond them lie holacracies. Holacracies, they use a distributed decision making, and they work in self-organized, self-managed teams. The decision making is happening across all of those teams. They're similar to how flat structures work, and they add the layer of interconnected clusters of those self-managed teams. This eliminates the friction that I mentioned in the Flatter case, the friction of integrating the handoffs from one to the other, because they're already interconnected. They facilitate that very easily. The information inputs and outputs flow very easily from one to the other. As a result, this collection of clusters becomes a self-managed cluster in itself. They have the self-managed teams that create the self-managed cluster, and they're all aligned around common goals. These definitely require very high levels of maturity in order to degenerate into chaos, just like flat. And finally, we look at the network. The network, I use an image that has a globe. They don't have to be distributed, and they fully support it. They don't care about locality, but they care is capability. Wherever the capability is, they want to be enabled, empowered to be able to secure it. Believe me, this is not an organization that you're going to have a discussion about RTO. They're not going to be constrained by a radius for capabilities. So these organizations have high levels of adaptability, and they have established very strong means of communication. They rely very heavily on technology to provide them in ready access to expertise, knowledge, capabilities wherever they reside. So they are also very nimble. What brings together these clusters of capabilities is either, for example, functionality, affinity and functionality, or in purpose. And the purpose can change. And as it changes, you need to change the shape of the structure of the organization. They facilitate it. They're dynamic in nature. So understanding these genes, you may discover that you are in organizational structure that does not support or is not conducive to supporting or is limited in its support for the agile or AI transformation that you're trying to implement. Understanding that, now you know that you need to do something. The good news is that you can do something. Just like genes in living beings can be modulated to either express or repress the functionality of the gene, so can you do in the case of an organizational structure to change the nature of the organization in order to support whatever you want to implement. However, those changes need to be applied very, very, very carefully. Just like splicing genes in living beings, this is something that needs to be done very carefully because you can damage the organization when you go tinkering with this. It is necessary to do when you find yourself in organizational structures that are not supporting the transformation that you want to implement. And you can do it. Just be very careful. You need expertise, somebody who knows how to do this safely. The other thing that you may run into is that you may discover that your organization has multiple structure types. And that can evolve naturally. It doesn't have to be a flatter that expressly and intently has another subtype in order to implement its goals. It could just be a much tamer version of that results from the company having a specific need, a capability, something that it needs to support that is not fully compatible with the majority of the organization. If this happens, that is an additional complexity that you have to factor in. And the good news is that these subcultures within your organization could be really good places to do some experimentation or to invite them as early participants or to provide input to your transformations because they already have some experience that you can leverage as part of your transformation. Speaking of building uh, on your transformation, let's leverage experience from prior transformations. And if you've been through an agile transformation, whether it went well or it didn't go well, use the lessons from that transformation to help you with your AI transformation. Ignoring what we've learned from the past is a sure way to land in trouble. And the trouble that we can land in with an AI transformation can have serious global level consequences. Can we hammer a square peg into a round hole? Sure, and we can make a mess in the process. So let's stop making messes. Let's learn from what's happened in some agile transformations and not repeat those mistakes in AI transformations. So, what are the next steps? What do we do? Begin with an honest self assessment of where you are. Take a look and determine what kind of organizational structure you have. If you determine that you have a hierarchical, you know that you're facing a lot of challenges, if not quite possibly a failure in your agile or AI transformation. So, at the very least, move your organization to a flatter. Do whatever it takes to get there. That's an entry point. And be careful, be conservative in how ambitious you are in your transformation efforts because you need to give opportunity for your organization to adapt to these transformational changes of its culture. If you're already in a flatter or a flatter key, you're in a good position to get started. Flatter keys, as I mentioned before, they're by nature they're supportive of creating these innovation hubs to allow you to explore safely with less risk than you would otherwise. Flat organizations, holacracies, and network, they're already in very good position to start an agile or AI transformation. They already have a lot of the elements if they haven't declared them officially. In the case of network, you want to strengthen your cross-functional collaboration skills and your dynamic adaptation skills. Because especially in very ambitious AI implementations, these are going to be tested. So you want to strengthen those as much as possible to be as nimble and able to adapt as you discover things. So reflect on your organization's culture, current culture, determine how it's hindering or supporting your agile adoption or AI adoption, and then figure out what next steps can be taken to put you in a better position for success. And in the meantime, take a look at the Lulu culture model or something else that YouTube recommends for you. And I'll see you there and I'll tell you all about it.